It seems that this place is only active when Christmas time comes around. In a very small town called Whitewright, Texas, there's a very old house that now belongs to my uncle. The structure of the house is very stable. As a matter of fact, it has been lived in a lot longer than usual. It is now used as a storage by various family members of mine. First experience was when I was 11, and 2 days before Christmas. It was late into the evening, and instead of my parents driving back home 27 miles, my grandparents offered their old house for us to stay the night in. It had been raining a little bit, and it didn't take long for the 3-bedroom house to warm up, so we went to bed. I had 2 younger brothers. One of them was still a little baby, so he slept in the same room in a little crib that my grandmother put together for all of the grandchildren. I was quite tired and almost fell asleep immediately when it started thundering and lightning. The first crash woke me up, and precisely the loud crash, the outside screen, sounded as though someone had kicked the door. The house had a horseshoe-shaped porch, and at each end of the porch was a door to the house. Another door was for the living room. I screamed, and Mother came in. I had woken up my baby brother, she had claimed, but the thunder had woken him up. My mother picked my brother and took him with her to get him back to sleep. I tried to calm myself to go to sleep and convince myself that it was just a cat that got scared and jumped up against the door. Many times, though, to convince myself, I would check outside through the window of the door and then run back into the bed. I was starting to drift off again when another thunder blast went off and lightning followed, but what I saw next terrified me even more so because I saw a figure outside the window through the window curtain. I screamed out again and scrambled off the bed to look into the next bedroom and tried to tell my mom that someone was outside. She didn't believe me, and upon the suggestion of my father, I was escorted to the living room to sleep on the couch, which made the very front part of the porch even closer to me. All the windows were huge, and pretty much most of the living room was hallway. Nothing but windows, but had dark brown curtains. The storm subsided a little bit for an hour or so, and I tried with everything to stamp down the fear that wouldn't let go of me, no matter how hard I tried to shake it off. I forced myself to close my eyes. At that moment, someone or something stepped onto the porch, stomping, and then started walking. I stepped into my parents' bedroom and asked my father if he heard the walking on the porch. He said it was the house settling. Look, I know it was just a kid, but settling of the house didn't sound like a heavy man with big boots either. I pleaded out of the window. I threatened. When I threatened, it would stop for a while, but start back up again. My last resort was praying to God for this to stop, to make whoever or whatever to go away. A few minutes later, the rain drizzled, and the walking faded away. It didn't stop immediately, just as though someone had stepped off the porch, but as though it was going away slowly. I fell asleep, and the morning came. I stepped out on the porch, and the whole porch was covered in mud clumps, from one end of the porch to the other side. I talked with my aunt, and she told me that the only knowledge of the house was an old lady had lived there, and that some neighbors had found her dead in her bed, and her dog was missing, but that no one really cared about the dog anyhow, so the missing dog wasn't much thought of after the lady's burial. The second activity was when I had moved in with my aunt in the same house. She moved into the house a year before I moved in with her, and my cousins, of course. My parents and I had very considerable disagreements. Anyhow, as usual, just a little before Christmas, one of my cousins and I were just about to go to sleep on the couch in the living room, which is the center of the house, when my cousin rose up off the couch and told me that someone was standing right beside me. I got off the couch and made a mad dash to jump on the other side of the huge circular couch and jumped right beside her. At that precise moment that I jumped up, at the corner of my eye, I saw a very faint light move very fast in the center of the room, not on the wall or on the floor. Dishes were knocked over in the kitchen, and my aunt turned on all the lights. To explain this away so that we wouldn't be scared, and for all of us to get some sleep, my aunt told us that a cat had found its way into the house, and we scared it. The next morning, my aunt went and talked to my grandfather, and a few weeks later they were digging in the backyard and discovered a well and the remains of a dog. They filled the well with rock and concrete. The activity stopped. Later it was told to me that the Christmas before I moved in, my aunt was alone at home in the same house, and she had been watching TV. Someone stepped on the porch very heavily and tried to break into the house by first turning a doorknob and then trying to force themselves through the door. She threatened whoever, and they went away. The house is now being used as the family storage house, and whoever's friend of the family storage as well. It has not been lived in since my cousin Shane. The story I'm about to tell you is one of a disturbing nature. It absolutely chokes me up every time I tell it. If my grammar or language skills are not up to par, it's only because I'm caught up in the horrid memories of that night. It was New Year's Eve. My cousin and I waited for our girlfriends to arrive, as we were having a party that night. Yes, there was alcohol, and say what you want, but I know what I saw. The same thing we all saw. Anyway, later that night, we were all in my room, drinking and singing, just having fun. It was a party. Time passed, and more time passed, and it began to get late. Something startled my cousin's girlfriend. She quickly eased her mind with the thought that it was a household pet, a large dog she thought. Little did she know, we had no pets. When she later confronted me about it, I told her just that. A little shaken, but mostly tired, she and my cousin went to lay down, leaving my girlfriend and I alone in my room. We watched TV for a while and just talked. We brought up how drunk my cousin's girlfriend must have been and laughed. Well, it wasn't funny long. As we sat there on the bed, half paying attention to the television, a thing slothed across the floor in my room. We both sat stuck with fear, holding each other as tight as we could. When it got to our feet, it stopped, looked up at us, and almost smirked at our fear. We got a better look at it then. It was a bloody, bludgeoned mess. It seemed to be walking on nubs of his knees and elbows, and finally dawned with a bashed-in skull. It made my poor girlfriend sick to her stomach. It continued its path to my closet and disappeared. We didn't sleep 1 second the whole night. If we hadn't all seen the godforsaken creature, I wouldn't have believed it myself. The next morning, the black lights were still on, music was still going, and bottles were everywhere, so I decided to clean up. When I moved the speakers back to the other wall, the black light shone down on the wall. Streams upon splashes upon streams, upon handprints of bright green trails, were on my wall. It looked as if someone with green blood was bludgeoned to death. And I remember watching forensic files, and the luminol that they put on the surfaces to detect blood showed up green wherever blood was. This really choked me up. So finally, I went and asked my stepdad if he knew the house's history. His exact words were, "No. Why? Is the house haunted?" This is the first time I've ever publicly shared this story. I've only told 2 of my closest friends, and sadly, they looked at me like I had gone crazy. I've never even told my family this. It happened when I was very young, so that could be a reason why my friends looked at me like I was insane or something. But the weird thing is that the memory of these strange encounters has stuck with me until now. I don't even remember half of what happened to me at that early age, but this experience is so vivid still that it makes me believe that it actually happened. I was 5 years old, turning 6. I was living in Providence in the Philippines, and my dad had come to visit me and my mom. He left 2 years earlier when he moved to California to find a job from the United States, and a year and a half later, I moved to the US also. I have a big family with a lot of aunts, uncles, and cousins. My dad coming to visit was a big deal, so the whole family slept over my grandma's house. My cousins and aunts and uncles occupied the available rooms, so me, my mom, and dad had to sleep in the living room. The living room is on the ground level, so if you open the window, you'd be looking straight towards the street. It was around 10 p.m. that night when I fell asleep, and I don't know how long it had been until I woke up because I needed to use the restroom. Some restrooms in the Philippines are located outside next to the house, and since I was only 5, I needed my mom or dad to accompany me. I sat up and asked myself, who should I wake up? As soon as my eyes darted from my mom to my dad, a figure caught my attention. He, or it, was tall, but I could make out a shape. It was a dark shape, but the scariest thing about it was that it was just there, leaning against the window, looking straight at me. I could make out 2 distinct points where its head was. Horns, maybe. I don't know. But how it could have opened the windows without waking anyone up, I thought, was kinda crazy. I didn't panic or anything. I just sat up and watched it looking at me for about a minute or 2, and then laid back down. I forgot that I had to use the bathroom. I pulled the covers over me and went back to sleep, hoping that I was still dreaming. Since I never really mentioned it to my parents, I can't be sure what it was. It was either a demonic figure, hence the pointed horns, or maybe a drunk relative who couldn't open the door, so he had to go through the window. Why did he stare at me though? And shouldn't he have had a face and maybe some color to him? No, that figure was straight black, like a shadow. Some people might argue that I was dreaming, and if I was, then that was a pretty vivid dream that still makes me remember what happened 16 years later. It gives me goosebumps every time I think about it. My ghost experience occurred at the trailer home that my family and I used to live. Several weird things have happened to us. Often, both my husband and I would be sitting on the couch watching TV, and the hallway light would be on, and out of the corner of our eye, we would see a shadow in the hallway that would briefly walk through the light, causing a second of darkness as if it was passing directly in front of the light bulb. My husband usually sleeps on our couch because he prefers to have the room icy cold, so he'd sleep on the couch in front of the living room. One night, in the middle of the night, he hears someone stomping through the living room. The sound woke him from a deep sleep. He woke up yelling, thinking it was one of our kids, yet he found no one there. Another time he heard someone stomping once again, and then he heard the beads on their daughter's door shaking, like someone walked through them. He turned around to look at our daughter's door, and the beads were perfectly still. Several items, such as toys, clothes, and jewelry, would come up missing, only to reappear at a later time, long after you decided you would never see them again. My daughter once saw a figure in the hallway. My daughter and brother are very close, so one night, her brother and her made a tent in my son's room. This tent was right in the doorway of my son's room, and his room was down the hallway that my husband and I frequently saw shadows. My daughter said that she woke up in the middle of the night and saw a tall, thin man walk in front of the doorway as if he was walking towards the living room. At first she assumed it was her father, until she started thinking about it and realized her dad is a much larger man than what had just walked by the doorway. We have since moved out of this place, and we have not had any unusual experiences at our new home. When I was younger, probably around 12, I had what I later surmised may have been a paranormal experience. My brother and parents slept upstairs, in our 1.5-story house in Waukesha, Wisconsin. One evening, I was awakened by one of my cats meowing quickly about 5 times or so. Her last meow was cut short, and I then heard footsteps quickly approaching my room. The footsteps stopped, and I heard what sounded like heavy breathing, like one out of breath, just inside the doorway of the room next to mine. The two doorways formed a corner. I was quite scared, as I thought someone was in my house. I also thought it could have been my brother, but didn't want to take any chances. I laid scared for a few hours until I fell asleep. Before falling asleep, the breathing slowed and stopped, but I never heard anyone walk away. Years later, I took into account that my cat never meowed like that. It would not likely stop so suddenly in mid-meow. She was fine, and I never saw any clues regarding this incident. Another time in that same house, it was an older house, probably from the 40s. I was walking down my hallway, and for a brief second, saw that the doorways were arched instead of the normal squared look. Imagination, who knows? My next incident took place when I was around 18 or 19. Two of my friends and I took a walk around my friend's neighborhood. The night was right out of a scary movie. Very dense fog that stopped probably 10 or feet so above our head. We could make out the full moon if we looked closely, and sounds of geese echoed when they flew overhead. We walked to a small graveyard, of course, where one of my friends proceeded to run ahead of us. My other friend and I stopped at a rather young grave. The death date was only a couple of years previous to this incident. As soon as we stopped, I felt an energy, for lack of a better term, in my head and chest, but not quite physically there. More like in my mind and soul, if you will. This lasted a couple of minutes. About a half a second after the feeling stopped, my friend said, "Whoa, did you feel that?" He and I described the exact same feeling to each other. My other friend had been hiding to try and scare us, had looked back at us, and saw us standing in front of the grave with blank looks on our faces. My final incident happened to my wife and I. She was using the bathroom, and as soon as she was done, called to me. She said that she saw the wall bulge out, like a bubble, she stated. The bulge then moved up the wall, and then sunk back in. The walls were plaster and solid. The bulge was about as big as a fist. Shortly after that, she had to go, I think to a function at church, leaving me home alone. A little while later, I saw something black fall from the ceiling out of the corner of my eye. I then heard what sounded like magazines slap on the dining room table, which was below the spot where I saw the black, falling thing. When I looked at the table, there were indeed magazines on it, which already had been there before I heard the sound. Nothing was disturbed, besides me. I've always had a fascination with things like this, but due to my beliefs, don't quite hold the same views as many of our readers or contributors regarding ghosts and spirits. Nonetheless, I like this site. I am a strong believer in ghosts, considering the fact that I used to see them a lot in my old house when I was a kid. When I tell people my stories, they do get very skeptical, so I'm going to tell you the story in which me and a lot of other people that proves that ghosts do exist, and it is unexplainable. I had found a stray cat back in 1996, and his name was Blackie. Anyhow, my grandma didn't like my cat at all, considering that she hated animals, and she used to kick him every chance she could. Of course, I would have a fit about it, and try to protect him every chance I got, but it was inevitable. So if Blackie was around her, she would kick him away, and as a result, every time Blackie saw my grandma, he would hiss and run underneath the table in the living room, all the while staring at my grandma, and growling until she would leave. To make a long story short, I live in Illinois, and my grandma had taken a trip to see her daughter in New Jersey and ended up passing away there. And then the day finally came, when they finally brought her body to Illinois for her final funeral. Of course, my grandmother's body was at a funeral home, but the very first day that her body had arrived in town, my cat began to act as if she was around again. It all started when me and my family were all sitting down in the living room with Blackie and getting prepared to go to the funeral, when all of a sudden, Blackie got up and looked at the doorway. His whole body arched as he hissed and ran underneath the table. The very hairs on my neck and back rose up, and I tried to ignore the thoughts of thinking that my grandma was in the very room with us. However, it was hard to ignore because he kept growling and hissing and watching something that we couldn't see. He would stare at the very chair she would sit in and hiss at it and avoid it as much as possible. Like I said, he was acting as though she was there, and his eyes would be moving about as if he was watching her walk around the room. He did this for exactly 3 days. He didn't stop until they finally shipped my grandma's body to her original home in Europe. After that, he never fussed over anything ever again. So, Blackie proved to me and my family that ghosts do exist. Hey guys, I'm back again with another video, and I had a slurtastrophe. Yes, a slurtastrophe, not a catastrophe, because I couldn't say anything properly, and I had to redo this outro thousands of times just to get it right, so I could get the message across. Wow, I still can't talk. Across, and I'm not gonna edit that out. Anyway guys, thank you so much for returning again and letting me be your narrator. I know it's been a while, I know it feels like it's been forever, but I haven't left you guys. I'm still narrating, I still love doing stories, and I'm still here because I'm trying to weather the storm through my, sickness and trying to feel better. So guys, you got a story anyway, you guys got more than a couple stories, so please take the opportunity to like, share, comment, and subscribe. I know I sound theatrical. I know I sound like I've got this like choreographed in my dancing mind. Just ignore what I'm saying. But really, guys, I really wanted to thank you for the viewership. Like, any views that I get is really, really satisfying to me. And no matter what, I feel like I owe you guys a video for, being out so long. And even though I'm kind of like ailing right now, I have appreciation for you, and I can't talk right now, and I'm about to cough, but I just want to say, guys, before I leave, that you guys are amazing, and I'll see you in the future. I'll see you soon, and like, share, and subscribe, like I said, and love you guys, and I'll see you in the next video. Wow, that was cringy. Anyway, I gotta go. Coffee.